Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 12, Text 25. Translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Dhritya bali samah Krishne Prahrada iva sadgraha Ahartaisho shvamedhanam Bridhanam paryupasakaha. Translation. This child will be like Bali Maharaj in patience, a staunch devotee of Lord Krishna like Prahlad Maharaj, a performer of many Ashvamedha, horse sacrifices, and a follower of the old and experienced men. Purport. Bali Maharaj, one of the 12 authorities in the devotional service of the Lord. Bali Maharaj is a great authority in devotional service because he sacrificed everything to please the Lord and relinquished the connection of his so-called spiritual master, who obstructed him on the path of risking everything for the service of the Lord. The highest perfection of religious life is to attain to the stage of unqualified devotional service of the Lord without any cause or without being obstructed by any kind of worldly obligation. Bali Maharaj was determined to give up everything for the satisfaction of the Lord, and he did not care for any obstruction whatsoever. He is the grandson of Prahlad Maharaj, and the history of his dealings with Vishnu, Vamanadev, are described in the 8th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 11 to 24. Prahlad Maharaj, a perfect devotee of Lord Krishna, Vishnu. His father, Hiranyakashipu, chastised him severely when he was only 5 years old for his becoming an unalloyed devotee of the Lord. He was the first son of Hiranyakashipu, and his mother's name was Kayadhu. Prahlad Maharaj was an authority in the devotional service of the Lord because he had his father killed by Lord Nrsimhadev, setting the example that even a father should be removed from the path of devotional service if such a father happens to be an obstacle. He had 4 sons, and the eldest son, Virochana, is the father of Bali Maharaj mentioned above. The history of Prahlad Maharaj's activities is described in the 7th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Bali Maharaj is glorified for offering everything that he had to Vishnu Vamanadev. He not only offered everything that he had in terms of material possessions, but he was prepared to cut his ties with his guru, with his family members, to his subjects. He was prepared to be humiliated. He was prepared to accept all kinds of tribulations because he had the determination that whatever it takes to surrender to Krishna, I shall do so. Tyaktva sadusjajam suripsita. And what is that? Suripsita. Raja Lakshmim. That's stated also about Lord Rama, or Lord Krishna, or Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Sudusjaja. very difficult. If one has a very beautiful wife, very difficult to give up. But Bali Maharaj was prepared to give up everything. For his determination was that I have to attain the lotus feet of Vishnu. Doesn't matter. Everything else in this world, compared to devotion to Vishnu, everything else is meaningless. So Bali Maharaj not only had property to an extent that we cannot imagine in the modern age, and we can't even believe it. We can't even believe that someone could be the proprietor of the whole universe. But Bali Maharaj not only gave it up without even any time to consider it, he just did it at the drop of a hat, as the saying goes. He didn't have time to go into a big, long contemplation about whether or not he should do it. He was immediately ready, and he knew that by doing so he risked losing the loyalty of his citizens. He risked being cursed by his own guru. He risked being rejected by his own family. But still he was prepared to surrender to Krishna, whatever happened. And as it happened, he was tied up, arrested by the very same Vishnu who he had surrendered to, or at least on the order of Vishnu. The Bali Maharaj is an example of the principle of utterly surrendering to Krishna, even if it's not easy to do so. Actually, it's not easy to do so, because in this material world we have so many attachments, and to give them up seems very painful, even though it's the cause of all our auspiciousness, to give up those material attachments. We can recall, as it is described in Sri Mahabharata, that Karna was born with armor on his body. So it was intrinsically mixed up with his skin. But at the request of Indra, posing as a Brahmana, he ripped that armor off his body. It's closely connected with his body, so he was prepared to tolerate such pain. Most of us feel our material attachments to be very strong, like that. To give them up is very painful. It's very difficult to give up such material attachments. But we should know that attachment to anything in this world is the cause of our misery. Because we're attached to this world, we have to come back to it. If we weren't attached to it, we wouldn't have to come back to it. So our attachment to this world is the cause of our suffering. We become attached to our wife, children, deha patra kalatradeshu, wife, children, etc. And of course our own body. But we don't realize that this body and the attachments which we develop to it, they are the cause of our distress. And actually everyone is suffering in this world. To have that vision is the beginning of spiritual life. That vision is particularly connected with Prahlad Maharaj, who is also discussed here briefly. Naivod vijay paraduryat duratyaya vaitaranyas tvadvirya gayana mahamrita magna chittam shoche tato vimukacheta indriyartha maya sukhaya bharamudvahato vimudhan. Prahlad Maharaj described the Vimurhas, great fools, which means almost everyone in this material world. I was just listening to a recording of Srila Prabhupada speaking with a professor of psychology, and Srila Prabhupada described who is foolish: people who do not inquire into spiritual subject matter, who are only interested with eating, sleeping, mating and defending. So the professor said that, well, according to you, then everyone in the world is a fool. And Prabhupada said, yes, that's a fact, because they're only concerned with eating, sleeping, mating and defending. So that is their position. Prahlad Maharaj said, addressing Nrsimhadev, he said, personally, I'm very happy. I have no anxiety for myself, even though he had been tortured by Hiranyakashipu in so many ways. But personally, I have no problem, he said, because wherever I go, whatever I do, I glorify your qualities and your prowess, so I have no problem. So many times devotees express they have so many problems. Well, we don't have any problems to the level that Prahlad Maharaj had problems. We want to get a taste of real Krishna consciousness. Okay, bring the pot of boiling oil. You follow in the footsteps of Prahlad Maharaj. All right, take him to the top of a mountain and throw him off. Put him in a pit of snakes. This is what Prahlad Maharaj had to face. But he wasn't disturbed, quite astonishingly. If any one of us would, what does speak of being thrown off a mountain? If any one of us, someone tried to physically lift us up and throw us off the edge of this building, we'd become very disturbed. We might die, we might not die, we might just break some bones. We'd almost certainly be seriously injured, which is very painful. So we would be disturbed. But Prahlad Maharaj, he remained undisturbed. Not only was he undisturbed, well, he was undisturbed because he was always thinking of Krishna. But not only was he undisturbed on his own account, because he was fully absorbed in Krishna, but he was disturbed at the plight of others, seeing that others are suffering. Prahlad Maharaj was acutely aware of and of the suffering of others, and he wasn't happy with that. He was very disturbed that people in this world, they have to suffer so much. Most of the people in the world weren't being thrown into pots of boiling oil. There was a lot of oppression by Hiranyakashipu, but when Prahlad Maharaj talks about the sufferings of others, he talks about the suffering that is caused by the illusion that they live in, that they're trying to be happy in the world of illusion. And that causes them so much suffering. When Prahlad Maharaj spoke about suffering, he was referring to everyone who was not Krishna conscious. It wasn't that Hiranyakashipu was enjoying and everyone else was suffering. Hiranyakashipu was also suffering, because he was also trying to enjoy this world, forgetting Krishna. So Prahlad saw in his vision, he saw everyone is suffering. No one is happy in this world. Srila Prabhupada, when translating the 7th canto of Bhagavatam, some of his disciples noticed that Srila Prabhupada was getting very deeply absorbed in the mood of Prahlad Maharaj, which he was, of course, always absorbed in that, but especially at the time when he was translating the 7th canto of Bhagavatam, Srila Prabhupada became even more so if possible, very compassionate upon the conditioned souls. So we might think that that compassion would manifest as the kind of sadhu, the prototype sadhu, with a soft smile and a gentle voice. Srila Prabhupada, he continued to be very, very sharp in pointing out the defects of persons who are not Krishna conscious. But this was his compassion. It's not that his compassion was simply trying to be nice with people, but he really wanted to share Krishna consciousness with others, and that is the principal symptom, if you like, of Srila Prabhupada. The love for Krishna is multifaceted. And different devotees may be attracted to certain features of Krishna consciousness more than others. Some devotees are very concerned, or they're very much attracted to deity worship. Others are very much attracted to cooking. Some devotees are attracted to preaching. And then again, some devotees like to do public programs in their preaching. Some devotees like to one-on-one speak with people, just small groups. They like to develop very personal relationship. There are so many ways that one can engage in Krishna consciousness. We see that Srila Prabhupada was very concerned about preaching Krishna consciousness, especially to those persons who are not in Krishna consciousness, to help to bring them to Krishna consciousness, to save them from the suffering condition that they are in. So this is actually the fact. Everyone in this world is suffering, struggling. I was recently in England, in the home of some people, and they were saying, well, we're very lucky to be born in England, where there's much less suffering, because in other countries there are wars and outbreaks of deadly diseases. A large part of the world was affected recently and may be still ready to reunite with, I'm sorry, I lost the track of what I was saying, right in the middle of this. A large part of the world was affected by that tsunami. Then that may again come. Now people are very afraid of this. So in England, people I was talking say, well, we're very lucky to live in a place where, compared to other parts of the world, where there's so many difficulties like this. But of course in England people are suffering also. They're not at all content. They may have a more comfortable life, but everyone in this world is suffering. The basic condition of this world is one of suffering, just as the basic condition of the spiritual world is one of bliss. The basic condition of this material world is one of suffering. So the basic condition of the spiritual world is one of bliss, because that is the actual nature of reality. In relationship with Krishna, everything is blissful. But then when we cut off from Krishna, then we become subjected to the suffering of this material world. So Srila Prabhupada, he was absorbed in this mood of Prahlad Maharaj, of wanting to give Krishna consciousness to others. Of course, that was Srila Prabhupada's sthai bhav, or his inherent devotional feeling. He was very much concerned to give Krishna consciousness to others so that they may be relieved from this suffering of material existence. And those who are preaching Krishna consciousness, just like we have a preaching center here, why do we do preaching? There may be different reasons for that. Srila Prabhupada also said that I come to the West out of duty because my spiritual master ordered me. Many people think that Swami Bhaktivedanta did a great job on behalf of India by spreading the culture of India. That wasn't Srila Prabhupada's intention. Srila Prabhupada's intention was to save the suffering conditioned souls from the terrible situation that they have fallen into. So this motivation is that by which one can continue to preach Krishna consciousness. If we're doing it for name, fame and glory, then we may also continue to preach Krishna consciousness. But no one can actually become Krishna conscious by associating with devotees who themselves are not cultivating the pure consciousness of preaching to bring people to Krishna. If instead we think, let them come to me, put ourselves in the center, then how will we get Krishna's mercy? The real preaching is on the basis of seeing that people are suffering so much. Even it's not just the beggars on the railway platforms who are suffering. It's not only the poor people, the rich people are suffering also. Apart from the suffering of forgetfulness of Krishna, they also suffer so much anxiety. Just as poor people, they suffer from lack of material possessions. We may say, well, a poor person, if he could somehow or other afford a motorcycle, then he could drive from his village to or at least some small cheap thing. He could come out and get a job in the city or something like this. We may say that if he had more facilities, then he could be more happy. He's suffering from lack of facilities. But then the rich man is suffering from excess of facilities because he has so many things which he becomes attached to. Generally we find that when people get a large amount of money, they get a big house to live in and they fill it up with all kinds of useless paintings and wardrobes of clothes which they never wear. So they're also suffering. We should not think that the rich man is happy and the poor man is suffering. That's only a superficial way of looking at things. The rich man, he's also suffering. So Srila Prabhupada was very much in this mood of Prahlad Maharaj when he was translating this section of Bhagavatam, the 7th canto. And we as followers of Srila Prabhupada, he gave one lecture which was titled, Follow in the Footsteps of Prahlad Maharaj. So we can also consider ourselves to be followers of Prahlad Maharaj. We should be very concerned with the suffering of others and do something to try to help them, such as, for instance, distributing Srila Prabhupada's books, distributing Krishna Prasadam, holding festivals of Krishna consciousness, and in all ways trying to bring people to Krishna consciousness, bring them out of their suffering condition. So it's one thing we should be very aware of, that people are very much suffering in this world. If we, sometimes in our activities of preaching by the influence of Maya, we may lose enthusiasm, but we should know that there's no need to lose enthusiasm. Again, our great exemplar in this regard is Srila Prabhupada, who despite his struggles in Ranchi, in Jhansi, before he came to the West. He set up an organization. It was going on, seemed to be going quite nicely. Then all of a sudden he was thrown out of the property which had been donated to him. And then again he was trying to work with different God brothers. Nothing was working out. Then he thought, let me go to the West. And it's very difficult for him to get there. To get the permission to leave India, to get anyone to sponsor him to go to the Western world. Eventually he went in the passenger cabin of a freighter ship. It's the most unlikely way one could go. Then when he went to America, there were so many struggles, but Prabhupada wasn't suffering because he was always thinking of Krishna. Then why did he bother with all that? He could have continued to live very simply and peacefully in Vrindavan, but he thought, my spiritual master has ordered me, it is my duty to do this. And also clearly he was very much concerned with the sufferings of others. We find in the Chaitanya Charitamrita also that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu expressed to Haridas Thakur his distress that the people of the world are suffering without knowledge of Krishna. So in our preaching activities, we should not be disturbed that people say all kinds of nonsense things to us. Just take it that they're mad. Don't worry too much about what they say. And go on trying to give Krishna consciousness to others, even if they're not very interested in it. By the grace of Krishna, in this country, people are taking, many people are taking interest in Krishna consciousness. In other countries, it's much more difficult to bring people even to show any interest in it. But nevertheless, we have to go on preaching Krishna consciousness to the best of our ability, because even if we can help one person to come up to Krishna consciousness, that will be a great achievement. Now, great achievement, that doesn't mean we think, now I've become a success, but that's something that Krishna will be very pleased in. Of course, if we just try, then Krishna will be pleased with that also. But try means to really try, not to make some half-hearted effort and then walk away and say it was impossible. So also in establishing these Varnashram projects all over the world so that people can take to Krishna consciousness in not exactly an ideal atmosphere, but a much better one than they normally have to experience. Eating some junk food and rushing off to work. That is not human life, that is subhuman. So these Varnashram projects are very important. We may say, well, we tried, didn't work out, and we're still trying and it's still not working out. But still, that is the order of our Guru, and we must take it very seriously as at least as a duty. But over and above the call to duty is the understanding that people are suffering so much in this material world, and by the grace of Srila Prabhupada, the grace of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu received through Srila Prabhupada, we have the means to dispel that suffering. That suffering is based on ignorance. Ignorance of our actual position. We don't have to suffer in this world, but we are forced to suffer intensely within this material world. What is the solution? Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has given the very easy solution of chanting, hearing the Bhagavatam and chanting or trying to understand the message of Bhagavatam. And Srila Prabhupada gave a relatively short commentary on this verse. Bali Maharaj and Prahlad Maharaj as great pure devotees, they are still living in this world. They're still available to anyone who remembers them or prays to them, so we can remember them and pray to them. Please help me. You yourself, you are so exalted that you're always absorbed in love of Krishna. So please help me to attain that platform and to attain the platform of so much selflessness that one can only think of Krishna 24 hours a day, and one cannot but try to preach Krishna consciousness. Ultimately, one is impelled by having such great knowledge and wanting to share that with others. One feels impelled to do so. Real preaching isn't 9 to 5 and then check out, but actual preacher of Krishna consciousness has to be prepared to sacrifice even so many difficulties, even their own health, physical health, to try to bring Krishna consciousness to others. It's so important. There's nothing more, no task more important in this world than trying to preach Krishna consciousness. So let us do that. You have a preaching center here, so try and expand matters more and more. Seems that the Telugu speaking people, now I was going to say Andhra Pradesh, but now it's split up, but they are very pious people. They can take up Krishna consciousness more easily than in other. We find many people like to come to Krishna consciousness in this part of the world. So let us take the opportunity to try to spread that. Otherwise, people they may go to some different kinds of so-called satsangs with all different ammas and appas and all kinds of supposed to be gurus who cannot actually benefit them in the way that His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada benefited them, others, by giving them genuine Krishna consciousness. So we should attempt to do so also. As Srila Prabhupada's Guru said to him, when he ordered him to preach in the English language, he said that will be good for you and for others also. So if we preach Krishna consciousness, we're not left out. Rather, we get more of the mercy of Srila Prabhupada. So, Hare Krishna, is there any question anyone would like to ask?
We should always be enthusiastic in preaching. Sometimes we are enthusiastic, but internally we are actually stopped to preach in certain places. For example, coming out of this nice song, this nice song.
Oh, I see. Well, these are technical points. Preaching should go on. Exactly how to do so in various circumstances that we have to see. It's not some kind of mechanical activity. It's not like preaching Krishna consciousness within ISKCON. It's not meant to be like being in some multinational corporation. That there should be organization, but we shouldn't become so tied up in the rules and regulations that impedes our preaching. Obviously. Anything else? So, Hare Krishna. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna.